Continuing where I left off. Chapter 5. "Well, let us begin," said Dólokhov. "All right," said Pierre, with the same smile. There was a feeling of dread in the air. It was evident that the affair so lightly begun could no longer be averted, but had to run its course irrespective of men's will. First Denísov stepped forward to the barrier and announced, "Inasmuch as the adversaries have refused a reconciliation, please proceed. Take your pistols, and at the word 3 begin to advance. 1, 2, 3, he shouted in an angry voice and stepped aside. The combatants advanced along the path trodden in the snow, beginning to discern each other through the mist as they drew nearer and nearer. They had the right to fire when they liked as they approached the barrier. Dólokhov walked slowly without raising his pistol, his clear, sparkling blue eyes peering into his opponent's face. On his lips, as always, there was a semblance of a smile. At the word 3, Pierre hastily moved forward, missed the trodden path, and stepped into deep snow. He held the pistol at arm's length in his right hand, obviously afraid he might shoot himself with it, and tempted to support it with his left hand, which he knew he must not do. He carefully held his left hand back. After advancing 6 paces and going off the tracks into the snow, Pierre looked down at his feet, quickly glanced at Dólokhov, bent his finger as he had been instructed, and fired. Not expecting such a loud report, Pierre started at the sound, then smiled at his own reaction and stood still. The smoke, which was especially thick because of the fog, prevented him from seeing anything for the first moment, and the shot that he was expecting did not follow. All he could hear was Dólokhov's rapid footsteps as his figure came into view through the smoke. One hand was pressed to his left side, and the other clutched the pistol, which hung down. His face was pale. Rostov ran toward him and said something to him. "No," Dólokhov muttered through clenched teeth. "No, it is not over." And he helplessly staggering a few steps, he reached the saber and sank down in the snow beside it. His left hand was covered with blood. He wiped it on his coat and supported himself with it. His pale, frowning face was quivering. Began Dólokhov, but could not at once get the word out. "Please," he managed to say with an effort. Pierre, hardly able to restrain his sobs, started to run towards Dólokhov, and would have crossed the space between the sabers, when Dólokhov cried, "To the barrier!" And Pierre, grasping what was meant, stopped at the saber on his side. They were only 10 paces apart. Dólokhov put his head to the ground and avidly bit into the snow, then raised his head again and adjusted himself with his legs under him, trying to get a firm center of gravity. He sucked and swallowed a mouthful of cold snow. His quivering lips continued to smile, but his eyes glittered with animosity and the strain of mustering his remaining strength. He raised the pistol and took aim. "Sideways! Cover yourself with your pistol!" exclaimed Nevesky. "Cover yourself!" Even Denísov could not help shout through to his adversary. Pierre, with his gentle smile of compassion and remorse, stood defenseless before Dólokhov, his legs and arms spread wide, his broad chest directly facing him. He looked at him sorrowfully. Denísov, Rostov, and Nevesky closed their eyes. At the same instant they heard the shot and Dólokhov's wrathful cry. "Missed!" cried Dólokhov, and he sank feebly, face downward in the snow. Pierre clutched his head and turned away. He strode off through the deep snow and into the woods, mumbling incoherently as he went. "Folly! Folly! Death! Lies!" he kept repeating, puckering his face. Nevesky stopped him and took him home. Rostov and Denísov got the wounded man away. In the sledge, Dólokhov lay silent, his eyes closed, not saying a word in reply to the questions asked him. But as they entered Moscow, he suddenly came to, and, lifting his head with an effort, took Rostov, who was sitting beside him, by the hand. Rostov was struck by the totally altered and unexpectedly exhausted, tender expression on Dólokhov's face. Well, how do you feel? Bad, but it's not that, my friend, said Dolokhov, gasping. Where are we? In Moscow? I know. I don't matter. But I've killed her. Killed. She won't get over this. She won't survive. Who? Asked Rostov. My mother. My angel, my angelic mother. And Dolokhov pressed Rostov's hand and began to weep. When he was a little calmer, he explained to Rostov that he lived with his mother, who, if she were to see him dying, would not survive it. He implored Rostov to go to her and prepare her. Rostov went on ahead to carry out his wish, and to his great surprise learned that Dolokhov, this brawling Dolokhov, lived in Moscow with an old mother and a hunchback sister, and was the most affectionate of sons and brothers. Chapter 6. Pierre of late had rarely seen his wife alone. Both in Petersburg and in Moscow their house was constantly full of guests. The night following the duel he did not go to his bedroom, but remained, as he often did, in his father's huge study, the very room, in fact, where old Count Beskov had died. However, tormenting the preceding night with all that had gone on with him, he now began to experience still greater torments. He lay down on the sofa and tried to fall asleep, to forget all that had happened to him, but this he could not do. Such a tempest of feelings, thoughts, and memories suddenly arose in his soul that he was not only unable to sleep, but he could not even remain in one place, and had to jump up and rapidly pace the room. At one moment he saw her as she was in the early days of their marriage, with her bare shoulders and languid, passionate gaze. Then all at once he saw beside her Dolokhov's handsome, insolent, callously mocking face, as he had seen in it at the banquet, and then that same face, pale, quivering, agonized, as it had been when he reeled and sank down on the snow. What has happened? He asked himself. I have killed her, lover. Yes, killed my wife's lover. Yes, that was it. And why? How did I come to this? Because you married her, answered an inner voice. But how was I to blame? He asked himself. For marrying her without loving her, for deceiving yourself and her. And he vividly recalled that moment after supper at Prince Vasily when he spoke those words he had found so difficult to utter, just Vasem. It all started from that. Even then I felt it, he thought. I felt that it was wrong, that I had no right to do it, and so it has turned out. He remembered his honeymoon and blushed at the recollection. Particularly vivid, humiliating, and shameful was the memory of how one day shortly after his marriage he had come out of the bedroom into his study a little before noon in a silk dressing-gown, and found his head steward there. The man bowed respectfully and looked into his face and at his dressing-gown with a slight smile, as if expressing his respectful understanding of his employer's happiness. But how often have I felt proud of her, he thought, proud of her majestic beauty, her social tact, proud of my house in which she received all Petersburg, and proud of her unapproachability and beauty. So this is what I was proud of? I used to think I did not understand her. How often, when thinking about her character, I have told myself that I was to blame, that I did not understand her, did not understand that everlasting composure and complacency, the lack of any sort of predilections, of desires, and the whole solution to the enigma laid in that terrible word, depravity. She is depraved, woman. Now that I have spoken this terrible word, it has all become clear. Anatole used to come to borrow money from her and would kiss her naked shoulders. She didn't give him the money, but she just left herself be kissed. Her father tried in jest to make her jealous, and with a serene smile she would reply that she was not so stupid to be jealous. Let him do as he pleases, she used to say to me. I once asked her if she felt any symptoms of pregnancy. She laughed contemptuously, and she said she was not such a fool as to want to have children, and that she was not going to have any children by me. Then he recalled the coarseness and bluntness of her ideas, the vulgar expressions that were natural to her, Though she had been brought up in the most aristocratic circles, I am nobody's fool. You just try it. Go on, clear out, she would say. Often, watching the success she had with young and old men and women, Pierre could not understand why it was he that did not love her. No, I never loved her, he said to himself. I knew she was a depraved woman, she repeated, but I dare not admit it to myself. And now Dólokhov, sitting there in the snow and forcing himself to smile, and dying perhaps, and responding to my remorse with an affectation of bravado. Pierre was one of those people who, despite the appearance of what is called weak character, do not seek a confidant for their troubles, but work them out alone. She is to blame for everything. She alone is to blame, he said to himself. But what of that? Why did I bind myself to her? Why did I say just for saying to her, which was a lie, and worse than a lie? I am guilty, and I must bear. What? The dishonor to my name, and the unhappiness of my life. Oh, that's all nonsense, he thought. The disgrace to my name and honor, that's all a convention, all apart from myself. Louis XVI was executed because they said he was dishonorable and a criminal, came to Pierre's mind, and they were right from their point of view, as were those who died a martyr's death for him and canonized him. Then Robespierre was executed for being a despot. Who is right and who is wrong? No one. But while you're alive, live. Tomorrow you die, as I might have died an hour ago. And it is worth tormenting oneself when one has only a moment to live in comparison with eternity. But just when he considered himself calm by such reflections, she suddenly came to his mind, as she was at those moments, when he had most intensely expressed his insincere love for her, and he felt the blood rush to his heart, and had to get up again, and move about, and break and tear to pieces whatever came to hand. Why did I say just vos aim? He kept repeating. And when he had said it for the 10th time, a phrase of Molière's came to him. Mas qu'est de allet le faire d'ascente galère. And he began to laugh at himself. In the night, he summoned his valets and told them to pack to go to Petersburg. He could not remain under the same roof with her, could not imagine speaking to her now. He decided to go the next day, leaving a letter in which he would inform her of his intention of parting from her forever. When the valet brought his coffee to the study in the morning, Pierre was lying on the sofa asleep with an open book in his hand. He woke up and for some time gazed about him with a startled expression, unable to realize where he was. The Countess sent to inquire whether your Excellency was at home, said the valet. But before Pierre could make up his mind what to answer, the Countess herself walked calmly and majestically into the room, wearing a white satin negligee embroidered in silver, and with her hair simply arranged. 2 heavy braids, like a coronet, were worn twice around her exquisite head. Despite her composure, there was a wrathful line on her rather prominent marble brow. With her imperturbable calm, she did not begin to speak in front of the valet. She knew of the duel and had come to talk about it, but waited until the valet had set down the coffee tray and left the room. Pierre timidly looked at her over his spectacles, and like a hare surrounded by hounds who lays back his ears and remains motionless in sight of his enemies, he tried to go on reading. Then, feeling that this was senseless and impossible, he again glanced timidly at her. She did not sit down, but stood looking at him with a contemptuous smile, waiting for the valet to go. What is this about? What have you been up to now? I should like to know, she asked sternly. What have I? Pierre murmured, trying to act like a hero. Well, answer me. What does this duel mean? What is it you want to prove? What? I'm asking you. Pierre turned over heavily on the sofa and opened his mouth, but could not reply. If you won't answer, I'll tell you, continued Ellen. You believe everything you're told. You were told, she laughed. That Dólokhov was my lover, she said in French, with her coarse plainness of speech, uttering the word lover as casually as any. And you believed it. What have you proved by this? Well, what have you proved by this duel? that you're a fool. Qu'est vos estes usat? But everyone knew that. And what will the result be? That I shall be the laughingstock of all Moscow. That everyone will say you were drunk, and not knowing what you were doing, challenged a man you were jealous of without cause. Ellen raised her voice and grew more and more excited. A man who's a better man than you in every way. Growled Pierre, scowling, but not looking at her or moving a muscle. And why did you believe he was my lover? Why? Because I liked his company? If you were cleverer and more agreeable, I should have preferred yours. Don't speak to me, I beg of you, said Pierre in a hoarse whisper. Why shouldn't I speak? I can say what I like, and I tell you plainly, there are not many wives with such a husband as you who would not have taken lovers, des amants, but I have not done so, she said. Pierre tried to say something. His eyes had a strange expression as he looked at her, an expression she did not understand. He laid down again. He was suffering physically at the moment. He felt a constriction in his chest and could not breathe. He knew that he must do something to put an end to the suffering, but what he wanted to do was too horrifying. We had better separate, he murmured brokenly. Separate by all means, but only if you give me a fortune, said Ellen. Separate, now that's something to scarce me with. Pierre leaped up from the sofa and staggering rushed toward her. I'll kill you, he shouted, and seizing the marble top of a table with a strength he did not know he had, he took a step toward her, brandishing it. Ellen's face was ghastly. She screamed and sprang away from him. His father's nature showed itself in Pierre. He was carried away by a transport of frenzied rage. He flung down the slab of marble, broke it, and lunged at Elena with outstretched hands. Get out, he shouted in a voice so terrifying that the whole house heard it with horror. God knows what he would have done at the moment if Ellen had not fled from the room. Within a week, Pierre had given his wife a power of attorney for the control of all his estates in Great Russia, which constituted the larger part of his property, and he had gone away to Petersburg alone. 2 months had passed since the news of the Battle of Austerlitz and the loss of Prince Andrei had reached Bald Hills. In spite of all the letters sent through the embassy and all the investigations made, his body had not been found, nor was he listed among the prisoners. What was worst of all for his relations was the fact that he might have been picked up on the battlefield by the people of that region, and now be lying, recovering or dying, alone among strangers and unable to send news of himself. The newspapers, from which the old prince first learned of the defeat of Austerlitz, as usual, gave very brief and vague accounts of how the Russians, after brilliant battles, were obliged to retreat, and had retired in perfect order. The old prince understood from this official report that our army had been defeated. A week after the newspaper report of the Austerlitz engagement, a letter from Kustuvov arrived informing the prince of the fate that had been befallen his son. Your son, wrote Kustuvov, fell before my eyes at the head of a regiment, a standard in his hands, like a hero worthy of his father and his fatherland. To my regret, and the regret of the entire army, it is still not known whether he is alive or not. I comfort myself and you with the hope that your son is alive, for otherwise he would have been mentioned among the officers found on the battlefield, a list of whom have been sent me under a flag of truce. Having received this letter late in the evening when he was alone in the study, the old prince went for his morning walk, as usual, the next day, but was disinclined to talk to his steward, the gardener, or the architect, and though he looked grim, he said nothing to anyone. When Prince Marya went to him at the customary hour, he was working at his lathe, and as usual did not look up. Ah, Prince Marya, he said in an unnatural voice, throwing down the chisel. The wheel continued to revolve, and the Princess Marya long remembered the dying squeaking of what wheeled, which was associated in her memory with what followed. She went up to him, and when she saw his face, her heart sank and her eyes grew dim. By the expression on her father's face, not sad, not crushed, but angry and working unnaturally, she saw that some terrible misfortune was hanging over her, about to crush her, the worst misfortune in life, and one she had not yet experienced, irreparable, incomprehensible, and the death of one she loved. Mon Pierre, Andre, said the princess, who thought awkward and devoid of grace, was possessed of such an ineffable beauty of sorrow and self-forgetfulness that her father could not bear her look and turned away with a sob. I have had news, not among the prisoners, not among the dead. Couteville's right, and he shouted as shrilly as if he wished to drive his daughter away by his cry, killed. The princess did not break down or faint. She was already pale, but on hearing these words, her face was transformed, and a light radiated from her beautiful, luminous eyes. It was as if joy, some exalted joy, apart from the joy and sorrows of this world, submerged a great grief within her. She forgot all fear of her father, went up to him, and took his hand, and drawing him to her, put her arm around his withered, sinewy neck. Mon Pierre, she said, do not turn away from me. Let us weep together. Scoundrels! Blackguards! Shrieked the old man, averting his face. Destroying the army, destroying the men. And why? Go, go, tell Lisa. The princess sank helplessly into her armchair beside her father and wept. She could not see her brother now as he had been at the moment he parted from her, and Lisa, with his tender yet haughty look. She saw his gentle, ironic glance when he put the little image around his neck. Did he believe he had repented on his unbelief? Was he there now, there in the realm of eternal peace and blessedness? She wondered. Mon Pierre, tell me how it happened, she said through her tears. Go away, kill in a battle in which the best men of Russia, the glory of Russia, was led to destruction. Go, Princess Marya, go. And tell Lisa, I will come later. When Princess Marya returned from her father, the little princess was sitting at her work, and she looked up with that special look of inner peace and happiness peculiar to pregnant women. It was clear that her eyes did not see Princess Marya, but were looking deep within herself, at something joyous and mysterious taking place within her. Marie, she said, moving away from her embroidery frame and leaning back, give me your hand. She took Princess Marya's hand and held it below her waist. Her eyes smiled expectantly. Her downy lip rose and remained lifted in childlike happiness. Princess Marya knelt down before her and hid her face in the folds of her sister-in-law's dress. There, do you feel it? I feel so strange. And do you know, Marie, I'm going to love him very much, said Lisa, looking at her sister-in-law's eyes shining with happiness. Princess Marya could not lift her head. She was weeping. What's the matter, Masha? Nothing. I was just feeling sad. Sad about Andre, she said, drying her eyes against her sister-in-law's knees. Several times in the course of the morning, Princess Marya attempted to prepare her sister-in-law, and each time began to cry. Unobservant as the little princess generally was, these tears, which she could not account for, alarmed her. She said nothing, but looked about uneasily, as though searching for something. Before dinner, the old prince, of whom she was always afraid, came to her room with a particularly restless, irascible expression, and went out again without saying a word. The little princess glanced at Princess Marya, then sat thinking for a while with what that inner of concentration seen in pregnant women, and suddenly began to cry. Has there been any news from Andrea? No, you know it's too soon to hear anything, but Mon Pierre is anxious, and I feel afraid. So there is nothing. Nothing, said Princess Marya, resolutely looking at her sister-in-law with her luminous eyes. She had made up her mind not to tell her, and had persuaded her father to conceal the dreadful news from her till after her confinement, which was expected within a few days. Princess Marya and the old prince each bore and concealed her grief in his own way. The old prince refused to hope. He decided that Prince Andrei had been killed, and though he sent an official to Austria to search for traces of his son, he ordered a monument from Moscow, which he intended to erect in the garden of his memory, and he told everyone that his son had been killed. He tried to maintain his own way of life unchanged, but his strength was failing. He walked less, ate less, slept less, and every day he grew weaker. Princess Marya went on hoping. She prayed for her brother as if he were living, and was always expecting news of his return. Chapter 8. Mon bonny âme, said the little princess after breakfast on the morning of the 19th of March, her downy little lifted as always, but as grief was manifest in every smile, every word, even every footstep in that house since the terrible news had come, so now the smile of the little princess, who was influenced by the general mood without knowing its cause, was such as to remind one still more of the general sadness. Mon bon ami, I'm afraid that this morning's fruskis, as Folka the cook calls it, has disagreed with me. What's the matter, my darling? You look pale. Oh, you are very pale, said the Princess Marya in alarm, hurrying to her sisters-in-law's side with her soft, ponderous tread. Shouldn't we send for Marya Baganova, your excellency? Asked one of the maids who was in the room. Marya Baganova was a midwife from this neighboring town who had been at Ball's Hill for the last 2 weeks. Yes, of course, assented Princess Marya. Perhaps that's it. I'll go. Courage, mon ange. She kissed Lisa and was about to leave the room. Oh, no, no! And besides her pallor, the little princess' face expressed a childish fear of the physical suffering that laid before her. No, it's only my stomach, Marya said. Say it is, and the little princess began to cry, capriciously and somewhat affectedly, wringing her little hands in childish misery. Princess Marya ran out of the room to fetch Marya Baganova. Oh, mon Dieu, she heard behind her. The midwife was already coming to her, rubbing her plump little white hands with an air of calm importance. Marya Baganova, I think it's beginning, said Princess Marya, wide-eyed with fear. Well, the Lord be thanked, Princess, said Marya Baganova, without hastening her steps. You young ladies need know nothing about it. But how is it the doctor from Moscow is not here yet? Asked the princess. In accordance with Lisa and Prince Andrei's wishes, they had sent to Moscow for a doctor in good time, and were expecting him at any moment. No matter, Princess, don't be uneasy, said Marya Bakanova. We shall manage quite well without a doctor. 5 minutes later, Princess Marya from her room heard something heavy being carried past her door. She looked out and saw a footman carrying the large leather sofa from Prince Andrei's study into the bedroom. There was a subdued and solemn look on their faces. Princess Marya sat alone in her room, listening to the sounds in the house, now and then opening the door when someone passed to see what was going on in the passage. Several women quietly passing in and out of the bedroom glanced at the princess and turned away. She did not venture to ask any questions, but shut the door and went back into her room, now sitting down in her easy chair, now taking up her prayer book, now kneeling before the icon stand. To her surprise and distress, she found that praying did not calm her agitation. Suddenly the door opened softly, and her old nurse, Praskovya Savishna, who rarely came into that room, as the old prince had forbidden it, appeared on the threshold with a kerchief on her head. I've come to sit with you a while, Mashinka, said the nurse, and here I brought the prince's wedding candles to light before his saints, my angel said with a sigh. Oh, nurse, I'm so glad. God is merciful, my darling. The nurse lit the candles before the icons and sat down by the door with her knitting. Prince Marya took a book and began to read. Only when they heard footsteps or voices did they look at each other. The princess anxious and inquiry, the nurse reassuring. The feeling that Prince Marya was experiencing as she sat in her room prevailed throughout the house and had taken possession of everyone. But owing to the superstition that the fewer people who know of her travail, the less a woman suffers in labor, everyone tried to pretend to know nothing. No one spoke of it, but over above the customary sedate and respectful good manners that obtain in the prince's household, a common anxiety, a softening of the heart, and the consciousness that something great and unfathomable was being accomplished at that time made itself felt. No laughter was heard in the maid's room. In the men servants' room all sat waiting, silent and alert. Torches and candles burned in the servants' quarters, and no one slept. The old prince paced the floor in his study, coming down heavily on his heels. He sent Tikhon to Marya Bakanova. Say only, the prince has sent to inquire, and come back and tell me what he says. Inform the prince that labor has begun, said Marya Bakanova, giving the messenger a significant look. Tikhon went back and told the prince. Very good, said the prince, closing the door behind him, and Tikhon heard not the slightest sound in the study after that. A little later, Tikhon went to the study on the pretext of attending to the candles. Seeing that the prince was lying on the sofa, Tikhon looked at him, observed his perturbed expression, shook his head, and silently going up to him, kissed him on the shoulder, and went out without snuffing the candles or saying why he had come. The most solemn mystery in the world pursued its course. Evening passed, and night came on. The feeling of suspense and softening of the heart in the presence of the unfathomed did not lessen but increase. No one slept. It was one of those March nights when winter seemed to resume its way and disperse its last storms and snowfalls with a vengeance. A relay of horses had been sent out to the highway to meet the German doctor from Moscow, who was expected at any minute, and men on horseback with lanterns were sent to the crossroads to guide him over holes in the road and snow-covered pools of water. Princess Marya had long since abandoned her book. She sat silent, her luminous eyes fixed on her nurse's wrinkled face, every line of which she knew so well, on the lock of grey hair that had escaped from under her kerchief, and the loose skin that hung under her chin. Nurse Savanishna, knitting her hand, was recounting in low tones the story she had told 100 times before, without thinking or hearing her own words, of how the late princess had given birth to Princess Marya in Kishinev with only a Moldavanian peasant woman instead of a midwife. God is merciful, doctors are not needed, she said. Suddenly, a blast of wind beat against the window from which the double frame had been removed. By the prince's order, one window frame was removed in each room as soon as the larks returned, and forcing open the loosely fastened latch, set the damask curtain flapping and blew out the candles with its chill, snowy draught. Princess Marya shivered. The nurse put down the stocking she was knitting and went to the window, and, leaning out, tried to catch hold of the open casement. The cold wind fluttered the ends of her kerchief and her loose locks of grey hair. "Princess, my dear, there's someone driving up the avenue," she said, holding the casement and not closing it with lanterns. "It must be the doctor." "Oh, my God! Oh, thank God!" exclaimed Princess Marya. "I must go and meet him. He does not know Russian." Princess Marya threw a shawl over her shoulders and ran out to meet the doctor. As she was crossing the anteroom, she saw through the window a carriage with lanterns standing at their entrance. She went to the head of the staircase. On the banistered post stood a tallow candle guttering in the wind. The footman, Flip, looking awestruck, stood below on the first landing with another candle in his hand. Still lower, beyond the turn of the staircase, the footsteps of someone in thick boots could be heard. A voice that seemed familiar to Princess Marya was saying something. "Thank God," said the voice. "And father?" "He has gone to bed," replied Dimian the butler, who was downstairs. Then the voice said something more, and was again answered by Dimian, and the sound of footsteps in thick boots rapidly approached the unseen bend of the staircase. "It's Andrei," thought Princess Marya. "No, it can't be. That would be too extraordinary." The very moment she thought this, the face and figure of Prince Andrei in a fur coat, the collar of which was covered with snow, appeared on the landing where the footman stood with a candle. Yes, it was he, pale and thin, his face altered by a strangely softened and anxious expression. He came up the stairs and embraced his sister. "You didn't get my letter?" he asked, and without waiting for an answer, which he could not have received, for the princess was able to speak, he turned back, and with the doctor, who had entered after him, they had met at the last post station. He rapidly ascended the stairs, and again embraced his sister. How strange fate is," he said. "Marcia, dear," and throwing off his coat and boots, he went to the little princess's apartment. Thank you so much for subscribing to this series of Tolstoy's War and Peace, and I'm going to continue reading. If you liked it, please give it a thumbs up, or if you didn't like it, give it a thumbs down. Please leave a comment below and subscribe, or do nothing and keep watching.